Good morning, everybody. My name is Captain Wilson. I'm an instructor here at the 48th Flying Training Squadron. A little background on me, I flew C-17s at Charleston for an assignment, and then I've been here flying T-1s for about the past 3.5 years. I am the prior Chief of Standabout and the prior Check Flight Commander. So I'm here to give a little bit overview, introduction to Usem overall, and talk about some of the stuff we have on the board here. So overall, whether you're coming from T6s or not, this is a good introduction to Usem and how we do it over here in T1 land. So for the most part, the way it's going to work is, hey, we're doing emergency procedures, right? So when you have an emergency in the jet, it's a difficult time. There's a lot of stress that can happen. So when we're doing these tabletop EPs, which is what they're going to be, and on your grade sheet, it's designed to slow down the emergency procedure, walk through some of these steps that we have on the board here, and then that way you can bring it to a logical conclusion. So we kind of chair fly during the tabletop EP, so that way if you have an emergency in the jet, you kind of have a nice muscle memory and just a memory overall as to what you should be doing when you're maintaining aircraft control, analyzing the situation, taking the proper coordination, and landing as soon as conditions permit. So overall, if you're doing a tabletop EP, the way it's going to start out is your instructor is going to give you a situation for the day, whether it's an engine failure on takeoff, maybe a tire failure on takeoff, or some other situation. There's always going to be the initial set of questions that you want to ask. So overall, the goal isn't to spin forever with these tabletop EPs. The big thing is the instructor needs to give you the situation, and you shouldn't have to ask too many set of questions to get to where you need to be. So for the most part, if it's after you're done flying that day, then it's probably going to be pretty similar to the conditions that you had in the aircraft. So some of the set of questions you might need to ask if they haven't given you all the information you need. Maybe, hey, sir, just want to make sure I'm in the left seat, my partner's in the right seat, where are we at in location, how fast are we, maybe the weather conditions and all that type of stuff. But for the most part, the way we're leaning forward with tabletop EPs is we want the instructors to give you most of the information so you don't have too many set of questions. But in case there's something you want to think about that could apply to the situation that you're working with, just have some set of questions you want to ask. After that, once you have no setup questions, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, sir or ma'am, I have the aircraft. I'm going to maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take the proper action or take the proper crew coordinated action, and land as soon as conditions permit. Okay, and that's MATL. If you've come from T6s, you know that MATL is something that you've already done over there. However, if you're new to tabletop EPs and the T1's the first aircraft you're flying in, MATL is something you'll hear an acronym all the time. It's crucial to tabletop EPs, and it really helps slow the steps down and take you through the process of what you want to do to deal with that emergency procedure. So to reiterate too, it's right here. It's maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take the proper action, and land as soon as conditions permit. So once you've set up questions, said MATL, said, sir, ma'am, I have the aircraft, you're going to move on from there, and you're going to maintain aircraft control. That could be something as simple as, hey, maybe we have a tire failure. Okay, sir, I have the aircraft. The situation you gave me is at S1, we had a loud noise as I started to rotate. So as we're rotating, I'm going to continue rotating the aircraft at 13 to 15 degrees nose high, keep the power where it's at, maintain center line, maintain coordinated yoke and rudder. Have I been able to maintain aircraft control? Once you're able to maintain aircraft control, it's kind of a time where you want to pause, and then we go to the analysis of the situation that's happening for the emergency procedure. And in the T1, the difference between T6s or T1s in general is you usually have two pilots, right? So you have you and your flying partner, pilot and co-pilot, and the analyzation portion of a tabletop EP usually goes to the person who isn't in the left seat. So the co-pilot's going to be the person to analyze. When you analyze a tabletop EP, time stands still. That's the most important thing. So that way you can really go through and analyze the situation. So you can talk about the electrics, the engines, what am I looking for on the engine stack? What am I looking for in the circuit breakers? Do I have any smoke and fumes in the aircraft? Anything like that. Once you're done analyzing between the pilot and the co-pilot, you should be able to say, hey, after analyzation, I think that the situation is this. And then the two of you can confirm that. So maybe after some analyzation, hey, we've determined that we don't have any engine failures for this simulated tire failure. We just have a loud noise, maybe a pulling a little bit to the right of the aircraft. So we're going to analyze it as a tire failure. Okay, that's great. Now that you've analyzed, you want to go and take the proper action. And that's kind of where the EP goes from more of the generalized setup to, hey, now we're fluidly going through and doing the steps as if we were in the aircraft. Okay? So taking the action after that would be, all right, sir, I'm going to maintain 13 to 15 degrees nose high. I have a tire failure. I want to leave the gear down. I don't want to retract the gear since the tire could have popped and caused some other issues with the aircraft. So we'll leave the gear down. We're going to climb out 13 to 15 degrees nose high, and we're going to head out of Columbus and then keep flying from there. That would be the taking the action, okay? Once that's done for the most part, then you're going to move on to the land as soon as conditions permit. And that, for the most part, is kind of the conclusion. After you've taken the initial action, whether it's a boldface item, then you just really need to move towards the conclusion, which is, hey, wrapping up the rest of the tabletop EP. So kind of chair flying yourself through the profile with your instructor listening, maybe asking you some questions to guide you along to get the aircraft back under the ground. So overall, for land with the conclusion, it's, hey, sir, I'm going to keep climbing out. My big picture plan is I'm going to fly around the pattern. I want to come around for a visual approach, and then I want to come back, let the tower know I'm going to declare an emergency because I might land and have some FOD on the runway, and kind of work that stuff from there. Okay, let's talk about the 15-day program versus kind of a check ride in regards to tabletop EPs. So this is written up here because in the 15-day program, that's designed to really have a slow introduction to tabletop EPs. So a lot of this information, and especially MATL, when you're in there might be a lot more setup questions. There might be a lot more maintaining aircraft control. There might be a lot more analyzation. And some of those questions your instructor might ask might be a little bit more of the chair flying, right? Hey, what are you doing with the aircraft? What pitch and power are you setting? What's your N1 setting? How much degrees nose high are you with the aircraft, and all that type of stuff. So that's in the 15-day program. I would say that tabletop EPs are going to be a lot longer in that time because it's almost a chair flying effort to see where your general knowledge is at, and hey, how are you able to handle the tabletop EP. So that'd be the 15-day program. As you progress out of the 15-day program, when you finish the transition phase of T1s, you're kind of going to get a little bit more into, hey, we know that you know how to fly the aircraft now. Now we need to see if you're able to really analyze the situation and take the proper actions for the most part. We don't need to ask as many questions as to what you're doing with the aircraft because you've already demonstrated to us through the transition profile that you know how to fly the T1. So that kind of leads us to, hey, check rides, which is why I'm here since I'm the prior chief of Sandoval and check flight commander. Check rides, if we're doing a tabletop EP on a check ride, then we've already flown your check ride, right? So you've already demonstrated the ability to fly the T1, whether you're in the transition, navigation, or even in the mobility fundamentals category. So for that, we're also looking for all this type of stuff, right? But for the most part, we really don't want to take forever on the tabletop EP. We want to make sure that you have the right set of questions. We want to make sure that you state MATL correctly, which is critical for a tabletop EP. Then we want to make sure that you're doing these steps accordingly, right? You're making the right decisions. You don't need to drone out the EP or anything like that. You need to just make sure you're making the steps, saying what you want to do with the aircraft, and give your plans and kind of walk yourself through the EP. That's really the differences between the 15-day program and then when you come to a check ride. The last thing I have written down here is the BEAN acronym. It's a nice tool that people use in the T1 to kind of remind themselves, hey, when you're doing a tabletop EP, there's some things to worry about, okay? So the BEAN acronym always is going to be boldface, okay? So that's the first thing you need to accomplish for a tabletop EP, depending on if there is a boldface situation or not, right? So hey, maybe there's smoke and fumes in the aircraft, maybe there's an engine fire, there's some boldface action that need to take place there. From that, after that, it's gonna be emergency checklist. So hey, I have the boldface accomplished, now emergency checklist. Okay, well now I have an engine failure during flight, I wanna run that emergency checklist, okay? And then from there, after that, okay, an abnormal checklist. All right, well I would like to reference the single engine landing checklist and maybe the single engine go in case for some reason I'm not able to land in a situation where I don't have an engine. And then lastly, the N is the last part of the BEAN acronym, and that's going to be run your normal checklist. This is just a nice acronym that is used to make sure that the checklist that you're running and the actions that you're taking kind of flow logically with what you want to be doing with the aircraft. In a check ride situation with set of questions, no, you're not going to ask that many pertinent questions for set of questions. It's going to be pretty moved along because we've already flown the profile and demonstrated that you know the things that you're supposed to be looking at. Now I would say in the 15-day program, there should probably be a little bit more setup questions. And I would say the really time where you're going to spend more of that is going to be in the analyzation. I would say in the 15-day program, the analyzation of your situation with regards to the aircraft is going to be much longer than on a check ride. The person who's conducting your Usem, the instructor, is going to want you to talk about, hey, what are you looking for on the engine stack? What are you looking for the electrics? What are you looking for the oxygen pressure to be? What are you looking for the circuit breakers? That's really going to spend more time during the 15-day program for the set of questions and then the analyzation. Whereas on the check ride, we know you've gone through the 15-day program. You're at the end of a category, whether it's transition, navigation, or mobility fundamentals. So we expect you to be able to get those set of questions and analyzation under control in a more timely fashion. 100%. There's a few, I would say a commonly used technique is asking for the big three, right? Which the big three is asymmetric thrust, smoke or fumes in the aircraft, or any uncommanded pitch, roll, or yaw. That's kind of a thing that someone might ask in a set of questions to kind of drive them to, hey, how do I need to maintain aircraft control with this situation? Which is a good technique. Not always needed. I would say between maintain aircraft control and taking the proper action on a check ride, I just want to make sure first that you're maintaining aircraft control, no matter what that is. If a bullface action needs to come right after that, that's okay to analyze that first and then take the action after that. But for the most part, I would say between maintaining and taking the action, if there's a bullface item that needs to be accomplished, it should be done in those steps first. It doesn't always have to be in maintaining aircraft control, but once you analyze and realize that a bullface is needed, then that should be the first part of the taking the proper action, should be executing the bullface on your tabletop EP. Another big difference in tabletop EPs versus T6s, or even if you're first doing your first tabletop EPs here in the T1, is the fact that there's a pilot and a co-pilot. There's two people aboard the aircraft at any point in time to fly the T1, and maybe even a jump seater. But in most times in tabletop EPs, there's going to be a pilot and a co-pilot. And your Usem and or your check pilot on your check ride is going to designate, hey, who's the pilot and who's the co-pilot. The big difference between it not being a single seat mentality is there's CRM, right? There's cockpit or crew resource management, and the two of you are working together as a team to get the aircraft safely on the ground. So for the most part, the pilot flying and the pilot designated in the tabletop EP is going to be the person flying the jet and leading the EP overall. However, the co-pilot is still an integral part to the team and an integral part to the aircraft and the tabletop EP overall. So if for some reason maybe the pilot isn't making the best decisions or maybe not making the right decisions at the right time, it is 100% okay for the co-pilot to speak up or say something and be like, hey, what about this, right? And a lot of times, whether you're in the 15-day program, whispering is a thing that can happen, but it's okay. Other people are in the room listening to the tabletop EP. It's fine to speak up at a loud enough tone, like, hey, have you thought about this? And then the two of you can discuss that, which is how it would be in the aircraft, right? If someone wasn't making the right decision in regards to an emergency procedure, I would hope that the person flying in the other seat would help them make the right decisions and make the right choices.